The courtroom was alive with the low hum of voices. People shuffled in their seats, whispering quietly to one another, casting curious glances at the front of the room where the judge sat. The sunlight filtered through tall windows, falling in sharp lines across the polished wooden floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, settling on the benches where onlookers leaned forward, eager to catch a glimpse of what was about to unfold. The air smelled faintly of old paper, polished wood, and nervous tension, a mixture that made the room feel alive yet heavy. At the center of all this stood a teenager. On the surface, he looked like any other young person. Slight in frame, wearing a simple shirt and jeans, his hair neatly combed but not styled. There was nothing in his appearance that would make anyone pause or take special notice. Yet, there was something about him, a calm stillness that set him apart from everyone else. He did not fidget, he did not shift nervously from foot to foot, and he certainly did not look intimidated by the stern faces around him. Even in a room where adults carried years of experience, titles, and authority, he held himself with a quiet confidence. The judge, an imposing figure with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through the quietest murmur, leaned back in his chair and surveyed the room. His robes flowed around him like dark waves, and his gavel rested within easy reach. A symbol of authority he wielded like a weapon. He noticed the teenager almost immediately. His eyes narrowed and a small smirk tugged at his lips. Clearly, he found it amusing that someone so young dared to enter his courtroom. Well, the judge said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. And who do we have here? A child come to play at being a lawyer? The words echoed through the room, and several people stifled laughs. Some of the younger spectators whispered excitedly to each other, while the older attorneys shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. The teenager did not flinch. He stood tall, his posture straight and unyielding. His eyes met the judge's without a trace of fear, only calm, measured focus. It was the kind of gaze that made people think twice, even if they could not immediately understand why. He had seen this before. People underestimating him, laughing at him, assuming he was incapable of grasping things beyond his years. And yet he knew something they did not. He had spent countless hours studying, learning, practicing, preparing for moments exactly like this one. The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his fingers interlaced. "Do you even know what you're doing here, boy?" he asked, voice sharp and cutting. "Do you understand the complexity of the law, the weight of these cases? Or are you merely here to amuse us?" A few murmurs ran through the courtroom, and the teen could feel the eyes of the audience on him. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some openly mocking. He kept his voice low but steady when he finally spoke. "I am here to participate, Your Honor," he said calmly. "I am aware of the responsibilities involved, and I am prepared to contribute." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Prepared, you say? Let me see how prepared you are. Explain to me the nuances of this case in a way that proves you belong in this courtroom." The teen inhaled slowly, a methodical, measured breath that seemed to still the energy around him. Inwardly, he began organizing his thoughts, recalling everything he had studied, every precedent he had read, every strategy he had memorized. But outwardly, he remained composed, his face a mask of calm, his hands resting lightly at his sides. Around him, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. People had become aware of something unusual, the stillness of the teen, the way he did not shrink under the judge's mocking gaze. The courtroom, usually a place of sharp commands and quick judgments, had grown quiet in anticipation. Even the attorneys and clerks seemed to pause, leaning slightly forward as if drawn to the teen's silent focus. The judge's smirk faltered slightly. "Do you even understand the legal principles at play here?" he asked again, his voice sharper this time, tinged with impatience. "I don't see much evidence of it in your appearance. Tell me, can you navigate this case without stumbling over your own words?" The teen tilted his head slightly, studying the judge as if assessing his weaknesses. He could sense the arrogance, the overconfidence, the expectation that he would falter. It was not something new. People often underestimated him because of his age, his size, and his youth. But he had spent years honing the skills to turn assumptions like that into opportunities. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, each word deliberate, carrying a quiet authority. "I am capable of understanding the legal principles involved, and I am prepared to respond with clarity and precision." For a moment, The judge simply stared as if weighing the possibility that the teen might actually be serious. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the wooden panels of the courtroom. Clarity and precision? From someone who still looks like he should be in high school? This will be entertaining. The teen allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips. He knew what he had to do. The judge expected a stumble, a mistake, perhaps even a display of panic. But he had come here to observe, to test, and if necessary, to demonstrate a level of skill that no one would anticipate. As the judge called on him to speak first, the teen stepped forward, each movement controlled and deliberate. He had rehearsed this many times in his mind, but now it was no longer rehearsal. The energy in the room, the skeptical gazes, the judge's condescending tone, it all became fuel. Each word he planned to speak had to land with precision. He had to convey competence without arrogance, intelligence without seeming boastful. The spectators watched, leaning in. Even the judge's assistants exchanged glances, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The teen opened his mouth, speaking slowly, deliberately. "Your Honor," he began, "before addressing the case itself, I believe it is important to consider the context in which these events occurred. Understanding the circumstances and the applicable legal frameworks is essential to a fair and just evaluation." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The phrasing was mature, measured, professional. The judge's brow furrowed slightly. The teen continued walking through the facts with care, referencing legal principles with clarity, and pointing out nuances that most adults in the room had overlooked. His voice was calm, confident, and precise, carrying authority far beyond his apparent years. The judge's smirk faded entirely, replaced by a flash of uncertainty. He could not quite believe what he was hearing. The courtroom that had initially been filled with quiet amusement and skepticism now fell into stunned silence. Every person in the room, from the clerks to the attorneys to the spectators, was forced to reevaluate their assumptions. This was no ordinary teenager. The teen paused, letting his words sink in. He had not yet revealed everything he knew, nor had he fully demonstrated the depth of his understanding. But already, the subtle shift in the room's energy was palpable. People began whispering, some in disbelief, some in admiration. The judge, visibly flustered, cleared his throat, struggling to regain his usual commanding presence. He leaned forward, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. You are more knowledgeable than I expected," he said cautiously. "But do you have experience? Knowledge alone does not a lawyer make." The teen met his gaze steadily. "Experience can be gained, Your Honor, but understanding, preparation, and the ability to think critically are equally important. I am prepared to demonstrate all of these in this courtroom." A few attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. They had underestimated the teen, and now they were witnessing someone navigating complex legal reasoning with precision and composure. The spectators, initially entertained by the judge's taunts, were now captivated by the teen's intelligence. The judge's jaw tightened. He had mocked. He had expected ridicule and a display of inexperience. Instead, he found himself facing a young person who could challenge him, who could dissect the case and present arguments with clarity and depth. The room had shifted from one of casual observation to tense anticipation. The teen continued, outlining his approach to the case in a way that was logical, coherent, and convincing. Each point was backed by reason and knowledge, delivered without arrogance yet with unmistakable confidence. The judge leaned back, momentarily speechless, struggling to maintain his composure. This was not the simple, naive teenager he had assumed would stumble under pressure. This was someone extraordinary. By the time the first hour of the proceedings passed, it was clear to everyone in the room that the teen was no ordinary participant. He had turned what began as a moment of ridicule into a demonstration of intellect and poise. And while he had not yet revealed the full extent of his abilities, the first part of the day had already changed the perception of everyone present. Even the judge, for all his experience and authority, had been caught off guard. What he had expected to be a minor distraction, a moment of entertainment, had become a lesson in humility. The teen remained calm, composed, and collected, ready to continue as the day unfolded, prepared to navigate the challenges ahead with intelligence, grace, and strategy. The courtroom, once a place of casual amusement and subtle condescension, had become a stage for something extraordinary. And as the teen stood quietly, observing the reactions around him, There was a sense that this day, this moment, was only the beginning of a story far greater than anyone in the room could yet imagine. The courtroom had settled into an unusual quiet. Everyone in the room, from the judge to the spectators, was now acutely aware that the teenager was unlike anyone they had ever encountered. Yet, as impressive as his first statements had been, very few in the room knew the full story behind him. Few could imagine that beneath that calm exterior lay years of preparation, intelligence, and an uncanny ability to think like the most experienced attorneys. While the judge gathered his notes and tried to regain authority, the teenager quietly observed the courtroom. He watched the subtle reactions of the attorneys, noting who was skeptical, who was impressed, and who was simply trying to mask their surprise. Each movement, each glance, each sigh became part of the data he stored, a mental map of everyone's expectations and weaknesses. This was not just a courtroom, it was a study in human behavior. Outside the room, the sun had climbed higher, streaming through the large windows and casting long shadows across the floor. Light fell on the wooden benches and the polished surfaces, catching dust particles and making them sparkle in the warm glow. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that the proceedings were no longer ordinary. The judge, trying to recover his composure, leaned forward again. "You have impressed us with your observations and your ability to speak logically," he said, his voice slightly less sharp than before. "But let us see how you respond to direct questioning. Let us test whether your reasoning is consistent when challenged." The teenager nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Inside, he was already preparing for the next round. He had anticipated this. Every experienced attorney, every judge had their own habits, their own ways of testing participants, and he had spent countless hours studying these patterns. This was exactly why he was here, not just to participate, but to analyze, understand, and demonstrate in real time the skills that years of learning had afforded him. The first attorney to challenge him stepped forward. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for being relentless in cross-examinations, she looked the teenager up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You speak well for your age," she said, her tone polite but edged with doubt. "But can you truly navigate the complexities of this case? Can you understand the hidden angles that most adults might miss?" The teen responded without hesitation. "I believe that understanding comes from careful observation and methodical reasoning," he said calmly. "It is not merely the accumulation of facts, but the ability to see how they connect and to anticipate outcomes that determines understanding." A quiet murmur ran through the room. The way he phrased his thoughts, measured and precise, suggested someone far beyond his apparent years. He spoke with a clarity that could cut through confusion and a calm that made even the most experienced attorney pause. She tried to press him further, questioning him on legal precedents and hypothetical situations, attempting to find a flaw in his reasoning. Yet the teenager responded with ease. Each answer was structured, logical, and convincing. He referenced cases and principles that seemed almost beyond the expectations of a normal teen. But he did not flaunt his knowledge. He spoke as someone, explaining clearly, making sure each point was understood. There was no arrogance in his tone, only quiet confidence and precision. The courtroom was leaning in now. Spectators who had initially assumed they were witnessing a moment of entertainment were now witnessing something extraordinary. Even the judge, who had thought he was the one in control, found himself reevaluating his assumptions. He had mocked the teen, believing him naive, but now he was confronted with someone who not only understood complex legal reasoning, but could articulate it with calm authority. As the questioning continued, small details began to emerge that revealed the teenager's depth of preparation. He noticed the judge's slight twitch whenever he grew impatient, the way some attorneys leaned back when they were unsure, the subtle hints in body language that indicated either confidence or doubt. Each movement became a clue, each reaction a piece of a larger puzzle. He was not just participating, he was learning, adapting, and strategizing in real time. The woman attorney paused, clearly surprised by the accuracy and depth of his responses. She looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly, as if reassessing her own understanding of the room. "You "You have anticipated my questions," she said carefully, her voice showing a mix of curiosity and admiration. "How could someone your age prepare for such detailed challenges?" The teenager allowed a brief pause, choosing his words carefully. "Experience can be simulated through study and analysis," he said calmly. "By observing patterns, understanding principles, and preparing responses to a wide range of scenarios, one can develop the ability to respond accurately, even in unfamiliar situations." The courtroom felt charged with a new energy. Whispers circulated as people realized that this teen was no ordinary participant. Some of the spectators leaned forward in astonishment, while others exchanged glances of disbelief. The judge, himself momentarily silent, looked at the teenager with a mixture of skepticism and growing respect. Outside the formal proceedings, a small inner monologue ran in the teenager's mind. He reflected on the countless hours he had spent studying law, observing courtroom procedures, and practicing articulation. No one in the room knew the full extent of his experience. To them, he appeared young, inexperienced, almost a curiosity. But the reality was far different. He had studied not just the law, but human behavior, and this combination gave him a unique advantage. The judge, attempting to regain control, cleared his throat. "Very well," he said, his tone more restrained. "We will see if your preparation matches the realities of live argumentation. Present your assessment of the case and your proposed approach to resolving it." The teenager stepped forward, moving with deliberate calm. He began to outline his understanding of the case, structuring his argument carefully. He addressed each aspect with logical reasoning, referencing details that others had overlooked, and offering potential resolutions grounded in both fairness and legal precedent. His tone was calm but persuasive, his words chosen with precision to convey clarity and authority. Every few moments he glanced at the judge, not with defiance, but with careful observation. He noticed the judge's subtle expressions, moments of surprise, flickers of uncertainty, and the gradual shift from mockery to cautious respect. These small details were valuable. They confirmed that his approach was effective. The courtroom felt tense yet captivated. Spectators who had come expecting entertainment were now witnessing a remarkable display of intelligence and composure. Even the other attorneys, who had once regarded him as a curiosity, were now quietly taking note, recognizing that his insights were not just accurate but insightful, sometimes even challenging their own understanding. As he continued, the teenager carefully built his argument, demonstrating not just knowledge but strategic thinking. He anticipated counter-arguments and addressed them before they could be raised. He spoke in measured tones, never rushing, always ensuring clarity. There was a rhythm to his words, a quiet authority that drew attention without demanding it. The judge leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment, trying to maintain composure. He had underestimated this teenager, assuming he would falter under scrutiny. Instead, he was confronted with someone whose intellect and preparation exceeded expectations. There was a growing realization that he had misjudged the situation completely. Throughout this, the teen's demeanor remained calm. He did not gloat, did not seek recognition. His focus was on the task at hand, presenting his argument logically, observing reactions, and demonstrating competence. Every word, every gesture, every pause was intentional, carefully crafted to convey authority and understanding without arrogance. By now, whispers had spread throughout the courtroom. Spectators and attorneys alike were beginning to appreciate that this was no ordinary teenager. Some were visibly astonished, leaning forward to catch every word. Others whispered quietly, speculating about his background, his experience, and the depth of his knowledge. The judge, though still struggling to regain his authority, recognized the significance of the moment. He had expected to belittle someone who appeared young and inexperienced. Instead, he found himself confronted with a participant whose intellect, preparation, and composure defied all expectations. There was an uncomfortable truth emerging. Age and appearance were poor indicators of ability. As the session drew on, the teenager's arguments became increasingly sophisticated. reflecting not just knowledge but a profound understanding of strategy. He addressed the case from multiple perspectives, considered the potential consequences of different actions, and presented solutions that balanced fairness with legal rigor. The courtroom remained silent, captivated by the unexpected depth of his reasoning. Even the seasoned attorneys who had once viewed him as an amusing anomaly found themselves rethinking their assumptions. They began to see him not as a mere teen but as a remarkable mind capable of analyzing, predicting, and reasoning at a level that many adults would struggle to match. The judge, still processing the unfolding events, finally spoke, his tone more measured. "You have clearly prepared yourself in ways I did not anticipate," he admitted, his voice carrying a hint of grudging respect. "But preparation alone does not guarantee insight. Let us see how you respond to spontaneous challenges." The teenager nodded subtly. He had anticipated this moment as well. Preparation, yes, but true skill was demonstrated in adaptability, in the ability to think quickly and accurately when unexpected situations arose. This was where his real strength would show, where he could combine knowledge, observation, and reasoning to navigate the complexities of the courtroom. And so, the day continued, the courtroom now transformed. What had begun as a moment of ridicule and underestimation had evolved into an extraordinary display of intellect, composure, and strategic thinking. The teen, calm and collected, had not only survived the scrutiny but had begun to earn respect, slowly dismantling assumptions and demonstrating that brilliance often comes in unexpected forms. By the end of this part of the day, it was clear that the courtroom had witnessed something remarkable. The teen remained poised, ready to continue, his mind alert and his strategy unfolding. The spectators, the attorneys, and even the judge were now aware that they had underestimated him. And though no one yet knew the full story of his genius, the signs were undeniable. This was no ordinary teenager, and the events of this day were only the beginning of something extraordinary. The courtroom had grown quiet in a way that felt almost heavy. Every person inside, attorneys, clerks, spectators, and even the judge, was waiting. They were waiting not just for words, but for the moment when the teen would either stumble or prove that his reputation for intelligence was real. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the room itself recognized that something extraordinary was about to happen. The judge, who had spent the last hour trying to maintain control, leaned forward and fixed his sharp gaze on the teenager. "Very well," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of skepticism. "Show us. Explain your understanding of the case. Convince us that your presence here is more than a curiosity." The teen took a slow, deliberate breath. His eyes scanned the courtroom, taking in every detail. The way some spectators were leaning forward in fascination, the subtle smirks of certain attorneys who thought they could intimidate him, the nervous shifts of the clerks as they tried to stay professional, but could not hide their curiosity. He noticed every twitch, every glance, every momentary sign of doubt or surprise. Each one was information, part of the puzzle he was solving in real time. He began to speak, his voice calm, precise, and measured. "Your Honor, members of the court, before addressing the specifics of this case, it is crucial to establish the framework within which we must operate. Understanding the legal principles and the precedents that apply is essential to any just and fair resolution." The words were simple, yet the tone carried weight. It was not the nervous hesitation of a teenager speaking beyond his years, nor the arrogance of someone showing off knowledge. It was the tone of someone fully confident in what he knew, capable of guiding an audience through complex ideas in a way that felt clear and accessible. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. He had expected hesitation, fumbling, or even mistakes. Instead, he heard articulation, clarity, and a grasp of the law that far surpassed what he had assumed possible from someone so young. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure how to respond. The gavel on his desk, which had felt like a symbol of unquestionable authority, suddenly seemed less powerful. The teen continued, now weaving in examples and reasoning that demonstrated not only knowledge but deep insight. "In examining this case," he said, "we must consider not only the facts as they appear on paper, but also the context in which these events occurred. Every action has consequences, and the law exists not merely to punish but to guide, to provide balance, and to ensure fairness in judgment." A hush fell over the courtroom. Spectators who had come expecting to watch a young person be mocked were now captivated. Some leaned forward in disbelief, their eyes wide as they followed his every word. Others whispered quietly, sharing their astonishment with neighbors. Even the attorneys, who had initially regarded him as an amusing diversion, were now listening closely, recognizing the depth of his reasoning. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain authority, but his tone had shifted. "You speak well," he said, his voice cautious. "But words alone do not make one competent. Let us see if your reasoning can withstand scrutiny." The teen nodded slightly. He had anticipated this. Words, yes, but now it was time to demonstrate thinking under pressure, to respond to unexpected challenges. He was ready. The judge posed a complex hypothetical, one designed to test whether the teenager could apply principles on the fly rather than simply recite learned material. The teen's eyes flickered slightly, not with fear but with focus as he processed the scenario. His mind moved quickly, analyzing, weighing, and forming connections. Within seconds he responded. "Your Honor," he said, "if we examine the scenario carefully, we see that the key variables involve the intent behind each action, the proportionality of the response, and the precedent set by similar cases. By balancing these factors, a resolution can be achieved that upholds both fairness and legal consistency." The judge blinked. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. What struck everyone was not just the accuracy of his analysis, but the speed with which he had processed the challenge. He had not faltered, nor had he needed to pause for guidance. The reasoning flowed naturally, confidently, and logically. Several attorneys whispered among themselves. One leaned over to a colleague and murmured. He anticipated the challenge before it was even fully stated. The colleague nodded, equally stunned. It was becoming clear that this was no ordinary teenager. This was someone whose mind worked at a level far beyond his years. The judge, recovering slightly, leaned back in his chair and studied the teen. "Interesting," he said, his voice carrying the hint of grudging respect. "It seems you are more prepared than I expected. But knowledge alone does not win a case. Can you apply this reasoning to the practicalities of court procedure?" The teenager's lips curved into a slight confident smile. "Yes, Your Honor. Theory must always be paired with practical application. Understanding the law is meaningless if it cannot be effectively utilized to achieve just outcomes. I am prepared to demonstrate both my understanding and my ability to apply it within the courtroom." He then walked the audience through a detailed analysis of the case, breaking it down into clear, logical segments. Each point was carefully structured, addressing potential objections before they were raised. He cited examples from past cases, drawing parallels that were both accurate and insightful. He anticipated questions, answered them proactively, and presented his argument in a manner that was both convincing and compelling. The courtroom was captivated. Spectators who had been skeptical were now leaning forward in astonishment. Attorneys who had doubted him were silent, taking notes and reassessing their initial assumptions. Even the judge, who had begun the day with a condescending smirk, found himself genuinely intrigued and somewhat unsettled. The teen's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. There was no bravado, no attempt to dominate the audience. Instead, there was focus, clarity, and precision. Every word was deliberate, every pause intentional, and every gesture understated but effective. He guided the room through the complexities of the case with a skill that drew admiration from those paying close attention. At one point, the judge interrupted, attempting to throw him off balance with an unexpected challenge. "And what if the opposing party argues X?" he asked, testing his ability to adapt. The teenager smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Then we must evaluate X within the framework we have established, considering both precedent and consequence," he replied. By analyzing the implications and addressing potential counterarguments proactively, we ensure that our approach remains fair, logical, and consistent with legal standards. The judge's eyes widened slightly. The courtroom, already tense, grew even quieter. It was becoming evident that the teen had anticipated not just this line of questioning, but many potential scenarios. His preparation was thorough, his reasoning rapid, and his delivery impeccable. A few spectators exchanged stunned glances. "He's amazing," one whispered. Another nodded, barely able to believe what they were hearing. The room, which had begun the day filled with casual amusement and skepticism, was now fully engaged, witnessing a display of intelligence and composure that few could have expected. The judge, trying to maintain his authority, leaned forward. "You are unusually skilled for your age," he said cautiously. "But tell me, what is your experience? Knowledge and reasoning alone are not enough in a courtroom setting. Can you demonstrate practical expertise?" The teenager's response was calm, measured, and confident. "Experience is often a combination of observation, practice, and reflection," he said. "While my years may be fewer than most, the depth of preparation, the study of procedure, and the analysis of countless scenarios have provided me with a level of practical understanding. I am confident in my ability to navigate this courtroom effectively." The judge leaned back, momentarily silent, clearly processing what he had just heard. He had expected uncertainty, hesitation, or at least a minor mistake. Instead, he was confronted with composure, intellect, and foresight that were difficult to match. The teen continued, moving through his argument with precision. He addressed every angle, considered counterpoints, and presented a plan of action that was clear, practical, and grounded in fairness. Each point he made was deliberate, each example relevant, and each conclusion logical. The audience was now fully engaged. Spectators who had come expecting a simple case or a moment of amusement were witnessing an extraordinary display of reasoning. Attorneys who had doubted him were quietly reassessing their own understanding. And the judge, despite his authority and experience, was forced to acknowledge, at least inwardly, that he had underestimated the teenager completely. As the teen concluded his analysis, he allowed a brief pause, letting his words sink in. The courtroom was silent, the weight of his reasoning hanging in the air. It was a moment of recognition, a subtle shift in perception. Everyone present understood that the teen was no ordinary participant. He had not just survived scrutiny. He had dominated it with intelligence, strategy, and composure. The judge, recovering his voice, finally spoke. "I must admit," he said slowly, "I did not anticipate this level of skill. You have demonstrated reasoning, preparation, and adaptability that are rare even among experienced attorneys. This is impressive." A quiet murmur ran through the room. Spectators exchanged glances, some nodding, some whispering words of astonishment. Attorneys who had doubted him now regarded him with respect. And the teenager, calm and collected, simply nodded, ready to continue. He had achieved the first part of his objective, to demonstrate his intellect and challenge assumptions. The courtroom, once a place of casual mockery and underestimation, had transformed. The teen had turned ridicule into respect, skepticism into admiration, and doubt into recognition. And as he stood quietly, poised for the next stage of proceedings, it was clear that the day was far from over. The real revelation, the full extent of his genius, was still to come, and the courtroom was ready, whether they realized it or not, to witness it unfold. The courtroom had grown still, the kind of stillness that comes when every person in the room realizes that something unusual is unfolding. The teen stood at the front, calm and composed, his gaze steady on the judge. Spectators leaned forward in anticipation, whispers now absent, as if the room itself recognized that the moment had arrived, the moment when the full truth would be revealed. The judge, for all his experience, could not hide the mixture of curiosity and uncertainty in his expression. He had watched the teenager handle complex questions, anticipate challenges, and present arguments with clarity and confidence. But there was still one lingering question in everyone's mind. Who exactly was this teen? How could someone so young possess such mastery, such insight, and such precision? The teen began to speak, his voice calm, deliberate, and resonant, commanding attention without effort. "Your Honor, members of the court, I appreciate your scrutiny and the challenges presented to me today. I have demonstrated my ability to reason, analyze, and respond, but I believe it is time to clarify one important detail." A murmur ran quietly through the room. Spectators exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed in curiosity and subtle tension. "Clarify?" he asked cautiously. "What do you mean?" The teen allowed a brief pause, letting the tension build. It was a technique he had observed countless times in courtrooms, one that heightened attention and ensured that what he said next would resonate. "I am not merely a student, Your Honor," he said. "I am a qualified attorney, fully trained and certified, practicing under a temporary disguise to observe, study, and understand courtroom dynamics in their most authentic form." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers, some gasps, and a few stifled laughs of disbelief. Spectators who had been skeptical moments ago were now struggling to comprehend what they had just heard. Attorneys exchanged hurried glances, some shaking their heads, unable to believe that a teenager could make such a claim. The judge, however, sat frozen, the gavel resting unused as his mind raced. "Wait," the judge finally said, his voice sharp but uncertain. "Are you saying that you have been practicing law officially while appearing as a teenager?" The teen nodded slightly, maintaining calm composure. "Yes, Your Honor. My appearance is meant to challenge assumptions, to study reactions, and to demonstrate that intelligence and skill cannot always be judged by age or appearance. My goal here has been to show, through action and reasoning, that capability comes from preparation, observation, and understanding, not merely from outward appearance." The courtroom was silent, the energy inside shifting from curiosity to astonishment. Some spectators covered their mouths in disbelief. Others leaned forward, trying to catch every word. Attorneys who had doubted him moments ago now seemed hesitant, their assumptions overturned in an instant. Even the judge, a man who had never been surprised in his long career, was visibly shaken. You've been hiding this entire time?" the judge asked, his voice tight. "All of your intelligence, all of your composure?" This was not merely natural talent. The teen smiled faintly, a small, confident smile that radiated quiet authority. "It is natural talent refined by years of study, practice, and observation," he said. "I have spent countless hours learning, preparing, and anticipating situations like this. My objective was to demonstrate not only legal skill but also the importance of evaluating individuals based on ability, not assumptions." The judge leaned back in his chair, momentarily speechless. His initial smirk of mockery had vanished entirely, replaced by a mixture of astonishment, respect, and the slightest trace of humiliation. He had underestimated someone who, by appearances alone, seemed vulnerable and inexperienced. Yet here was proof that he had been entirely wrong. Some of the attorneys in the courtroom whispered among themselves. "Unbelievable," one said. "He's actually an attorney." Another nodded. "And he's brilliant. Look at how he handled the challenges earlier. No hesitation, no mistakes." The teen continued, now addressing the entire room with measured authority. "I did not seek attention or recognition. My objective was to study and understand. But it is also a lesson for all of us. Judgment based solely on appearances can lead to mistakes, missed opportunities, and underestimation. Competence and intelligence are not always visible on the surface." The judge's eyes narrowed, the first trace of admiration visible in his expression. He had thought he was in control, that he could mock a teenager and assert his authority. Instead, he was confronted with someone whose intellect, preparation, and composure were undeniable. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely challenged, not just in this case, but in his perception of the world and the people within it. A young clerk sitting near the back of the courtroom whispered to her colleague, "I can't believe it. He's really an attorney, and he's handling all this like he's been doing it for decades." Her colleague nodded, equally amazed. The teen allowed a brief pause, observing reactions, letting the truth resonate. The courtroom had shifted entirely. Where there had been skepticism, there was now respect. Where there had been amusement, there was now awe. Where there had been doubt, there was now recognition. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. "Very well," he said, his voice quieter, more measured. "You have revealed something unexpected. Your skill, preparation, and understanding are evident. But tell me, why reveal this now? Why disguise yourself and go through this charade?" The teen's eyes were steady, thoughtful. "Your Honor, I wanted to demonstrate a principle. People often underestimate others based on superficial traits, age, appearance, demeanor. By presenting myself as a seemingly ordinary teenager, I allowed the court to interact with me without bias. Now, having demonstrated my competence, the lesson is clear. Capability cannot always be judged by what is visible." The judge nodded slowly, the initial shock giving way to a mix of respect and reflection. He had witnessed countless cases, but rarely had he been confronted with a lesson so direct and personal. This was more than a legal challenge. It was a confrontation with his own assumptions and judgments. Several attorneys, still recovering from the revelation, stepped forward cautiously. One said, "Your reasoning earlier, your preparation, it was extraordinary, and now we understand why. Your ability to anticipate challenges, adapt to questions, and present complex ideas so clearly is unlike anything I've seen. The teen inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the compliment without arrogance. Thank you, he said. I have studied, observed, and practiced. My purpose has always been to learn, to apply knowledge effectively, and to demonstrate that preparation and understanding are as valuable as experience. The courtroom remained captivated. Spectators, attorneys, and clerks alike were fully engaged, some leaning forward in awe, others exchanging whispered comments. Even the judge, though struggling to maintain authority, could not hide the subtle respect forming in his expression. He had been wrong to mock, wrong to assume incompetence based on age. The teen continued, methodically walking the courtroom through the points he had raised earlier. Each argument, each observation, each demonstration of strategy and reasoning was now framed with the knowledge of his true identity. The subtle hints he had dropped earlier, his careful observation, his anticipation of questions now made sense. Everything was connected. The audience could see the deliberate skill behind every word, every gesture, every pause. As he spoke, the judge realized that he was witnessing a rare mind in action. This was someone who combined natural intellect with meticulous preparation, someone who had mastered both theory and application. It was more than impressive. It was transformative. He had entered the courtroom expecting to assert authority and deliver judgment, but instead, he had become a student of this extraordinary individual. The teen paused once more, allowing the courtroom to absorb the revelation fully. Your Honor, members of the court, he said, today is not only about this case. It is about recognizing that intelligence, skill, and preparation can manifest in unexpected ways. Do not judge based on appearances. Evaluate based on merit, effort, and understanding. This principle, more than any single argument, is what I hope will be remembered. A moment of silence followed. The weight of his words, combined with the earlier demonstration of skill, hung in the air. Spectators were moved not only by the revelation but by the humility and clarity with which it was presented. Attorneys nodded quietly, some taking notes, some reflecting silently. The judge, finally regaining composure, cleared his throat once more. You have certainly proven a point, he said slowly, a trace of admiration in his tone. Your preparation, reasoning, and composure are exceptional. I must admit I underestimated you completely. You have earned respect not only for your skills but also for the lesson you have taught us today. The teen inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the statement without appearing boastful. Thank you, Your Honor, he said. Respect is earned through action, reasoning, and understanding, and I hope that my presence here demonstrates that merit should always guide judgment. The courtroom remained absorbed in the moment. The transformation was complete. Skepticism had given way to recognition, doubt to admiration, and mockery to respect. The teen, calm and composed, had not only revealed his true identity, but had also reshaped the perception of everyone present. As the proceedings continued, there was a subtle shift in the energy of the courtroom. Spectators were more attentive, attorneys more thoughtful, and even the judge approached the remainder of the session with a renewed awareness of the importance of careful observation and humility. The teen had not only demonstrated legal skill, he had demonstrated the power of intellect, preparation, and the courage to challenge assumptions. By the end of this part of the day, it was clear that the courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary. The teen had transformed what began as ridicule into respect, turning skepticism into awe and doubt into recognition. The revelation of his true identity had shocked the judge, inspired the spectators, and left a lasting impression on all who had observed. The courtroom was no longer the same as it had been that morning. It had become a place where intelligence and preparation triumphed over assumptions, where a young mind had challenged authority, and where a lesson had been delivered in the most remarkable way. The teen stood quietly, composed, and ready to continue, knowing that the day's most important revelation, the recognition of true genius, had now been achieved. Continue generating.